Wait, Hitler says what? That it's okay to withdraw. Withdraw? You mean retreat? Wait, now Hitler never says that. Really? Wow. What? But this time it might not matter. Too late. Wow. February 12th, 1943. For 6 long months it has been fought over, but this week it comes to its end. The Battle of Guadalcanal. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Battle of Stalingrad came to an end with the destruction of the German Sixth Army. This was an enormous victory for the Soviet Red Army. Well, for the Allies in general. It also came on the 10th anniversary of Adolf Hitler's rise to power. The Germans were gaining ground in Tunisia, though, and in the Solomons there was a naval battle off Guadalcanal, and the Japanese began their evacuation of 17th Army from Guadalcanal Island. I did not have time to talk about that last week, so I will start there today. It's called Operation KE, and it begins on the 1st. 20 destroyers are assembled for the actual troop movement. They assemble at Shortland Harbor, but the day begins with 5 American B-17s bombing them. This is unsuccessful. These bombers are escorted by fighters, but not so are the 4 more bombers that appear a little while later, which now have 48 Japanese Zeros to deal with. 3 of those 4 bombers are shot down, and KE is neither damaged nor delayed. Shintaro Hashimoto and those 20 destroyers leave Shortland in 2 columns at 11:30 a.m. The Cactus Air Force sends up 92 planes to hit it in 2 waves. The first manages to damage a destroyer. The second damages Hashimoto's flagship to the point where he transfers his flag. This delays the mission by 30 minutes. The soldiers to be evacuated are ready by 9 that evening, but the Japanese ships are next attacked by PT boats. 2 attack unsuccessfully off Savo Island and 1 is destroyed. 3 more attack off Cape Esperance, again losing 1 of their number without hurting the convoy. 2 more are hit by air south of Savo, and another 1 goes down. The transport destroyers reach Esperance and Kamimbo and load the troops aboard to begin evacuation. Here are 2 first-hand descriptions of those men that have been on the island for months that I found in Richard Frank's Guadalcanal. They wore only the remnants of clothing. Probably they were happy, but they showed no expression. All had dengue or malaria. Their digestive organs were so completely destroyed, we couldn't give them good food, only porridge. And so undernourished that their beards, nails, and hair had all stopped growing. Their joints looked pitifully large. They suffered from constant and uncontrolled diarrhea. At 8:30 on the 2nd, 4,335 of them reached Bougainville. On the 5th at 12:50, 3,921 more men reach it. But now, what to do about the rear guard that covered them? They'll have to send at least 4 destroyers as an escort guard for at least an equal number to transport it. And the rearguard commander, Colonel Matsuda, thinks it'll still be certain death. He also thinks the sacrifice of his 2,000 men is a lesser loss for Japan than even a single destroyer. As this week gets going, 17th Army Headquarters reckons the odds of getting them out are about 50-50. And Matsuda gets the news that the Imperial Navy might only be able to pick up men already waiting in boats at sea, and anyone else would have to make their own way to New Georgia. They are very worried about the reports of American carriers near Guadalcanal. Hashimoto says whatever headquarters or 8th Fleet says, he personally guarantees the evacuation of all of the men. Here's the thing. American Commander Alexander Patch thinks those earlier runs of the Tokyo Express were dropping off a regiment and supplies, not evacuating them. His men are converging on the Japanese positions and shelling them the 7th, which is for Matsuda, D-Day. Just after 9:30, he gets his men aboard those landing craft they have that are still operational, and they basically pray to be picked up before they can be spotted, since they are sitting ducks. Hashimoto is true to his word, commanding 18 destroyers. They are hit by the Cactus Air Force again, but not by carrier planes as well. And though 2 destroyers are forced to turn back, at 3 minutes past midnight, boarding is completed, and at 10 o'clock on the 8th, 1,972 men of the rearguard reach Bougainville. So, On the 9th, Guadalcanal is finally secured by the Americans. Patch announces total and complete defeat on Guadalcanal effected 1625 today. The Tokyo Express no longer has a terminus on Guadalcanal. The Japanese have taken nearly 5 times the number of men killed in the campaign as the Americans, but at sea and in the air, losses have been about equal. Now the Americans are masters of what is, for all practical purposes, a huge, unsinkable aircraft carrier for the protection of Australia, the recapture of the Solomons, and the following thrust north across the Pacific. The Japanese are not the only Axis forces pulling back this week. Erich von Manstein meets Adolf Hitler on the 6th, and Hitler agrees to allow an eventual retreat of the Axis forces in the southern Soviet Union to behind the Mius River in the face of all of the Soviets' recent advances. See, Manstein, running Army Group Don, does some operational thinking. Since he is not going to get any new reinforcements, he's going to have to free up troops from somewhere along the lines if he's going to launch any counteroffensive. But he's got Groups Holit and Fretter Pico and 2 whole panzer armies deployed all the way into the eastern bend of the Donets and the lower Don, pulling them back to a straighter and far, far shorter line at the Mius River, would free up loads and loads of troops for mobile operations. This is actually the positions Army Group South occupied last winter. But if he can do this, where would the attacks by those mobile forces happen? Well, he's thinking of moving the formations on the right, the 1st and 4th Panzer Armies, to the left. Once they had arrived, they would launch a counteroffensive into the spent Soviet assault formations whose commanders were still driving them recklessly to the west. It would be a backhand blow that was most effective once the enemy had committed himself, had driven far forward of his base, and had exhausted his energy and supplies. Hitler does argue with Manstein about withdrawing, but then again, it's obvious to both that only that would restore a war of movement. And that's what the Germans are good at. Manstein does not especially want to retreat either, but they agree that they don't have much choice. Hitler approves Manstein's backhand blow. Of course, there is always the chance that it's too late for such a blow already. In the Donbas, Lysychansk falls the 6th, while the Germans actually leave it under cover of a raging blizzard, navigating out using a compass and escaping the Soviet pincers that are closing in on the city. The Soviet 6th Army, 1st Guards Army, and Marky and Popov's mobile group are driving west and south like mad around there. What if they reach the Sea of Azov at Taganrog, or even Mariupol? That would cut off the 1st and 4th Panzers and Group Holit, or even worse, reaching and crossing the Dnieper at some place like Dnipropetrovsk. This would cut off the whole southern part of the German forces, turning an operation-level victory into a strategic triumph, a super Stalingrad of sorts. The 2 Panzer armies had to hurry. A problem made even worse by the weather. They were moving along the coast, areas where the thaw had already set in and the mud had arrived with a vengeance. Soviet forces far to the north were still driving smoothly along frozen, hard roads. There was therefore a certain frantic quality to German preparations, and so hurried was the planning that the operation never really received a name. So, a race against time it is to be. The Soviets are also advancing further north on their drive to Kharkov. Starting the 6th, elements of the Soviet 3rd Tank Army are fighting for the southeastern approaches to Kharkov. That day, Red Army troops cross the Donets at Izium and reach Barvenkovo. The 7th, they take Kramatorsk. The 9th and 10th, the Soviets have crossed the Seversky Donets, but still, a continuous front line remained elusive, and the commander of the advancing armies was persistent in seeking gaps in the enemy's formation to build on his success. And to the north of Kharkov, on the 7th, they hit Belgorod, and the Germans hold out until the end of the 8th, before vacating the premises. The 9th, the Soviets take Belgorod, and Kirill Moskalenko is now maneuvering into a position from which he can cut off Kharkov from the north. On the 10th, the Soviets take Volchansk and are just east of Kharkov. The battle for that city really begins this day. Even further to the north, on the 7th, the Soviets cut the road from Kursk to Orel, and on the 8th, they take Kursk. This further endangers the whole southern Axis front. As for their most southern positions this week, the last units of the 1st Panzer Army crossed the Don bridges and reached Rostov on the 8th. This has pretty much saved that army from being destroyed. Ewald von Kleist was actually promoted to Field Marshal at the beginning of the month for managing to accomplish this. A Soviet advance is only 8 kilometers from Rostov at the mouth of the Don. On the 6th, they take Bataisk, and on the 7th, take Azov on the Sea of Azov and close in on Rostov from that side. The Soviet Southern Front has been fighting Operation Dawn since the beginning of the month, but it has failed its biggest objective other than taking Rostov, which was to cut off and destroy the 1st Panzer Army. And starting really the 8th is the bloody fight to take Rostov. The Soviets are trying to envelop it, but they don't quite seem to have the force. Thing is, the plan isn't just to take Rostov. The plan is for the Southern Front to reach the Mius River and be the anvil for Southwestern Front's hammer blow from the north. Manstein is withdrawing from Rostov to do what I talked about a few minutes ago. And because of this, a new sense of urgency began to influence the Southern Front's leaders and planners, as the Stavka attached greater significance to the Southern Front's future offensive operations. Glantz goes on to say that this urgency is because of Joseph Stalin and Stavka's decision to try to wipe out all German forces in the south of the USSR all at once. You can see why they're so optimistic. I mean, they handled the German 6th and the Romanian 3rd and 4th armies with Operation Uranus. Then they wrecked the Hungarian 2nd and Italian 8th armies, and they have actually forced the Wehrmacht to retreat. They've done pretty good. But the plan now is to rout the rest of Army Groups B and Don, and then split the entire Eastern Front by having Konstantin Rokossovsky's new Central Front drive through Kursk to the Desna River later this month. And the plan for the Southern Front is for Rodion Malinovsky to reach the Mius River by the 17th. All this meant that the Southern Front's mission had shifted dramatically from conducting a casual pursuit to mounting a determined offensive, with significant implications for the Stavka's overall strategic plan. Given the Southern Front's parlous condition, especially the weakness of its mobile forces, this would become a challenging task indeed. Southwest of Rostov, the Soviets take Yeysk the 6th. This cuts off the Axis forces that remain in the Kuban. These troops are in the triangle Yeysk, Novorossiysk, Krasnodar. But by the morning of the 7th, the Soviets have 8,000 troops on the Malaya Zemlya beachhead. A German attack against them this morning fails. By the 9th, they've swelled to 10,000 and they push south, occupying Mount Miskhako, establishing themselves on the high ground dominating Novorossiysk. On the 9th, the Soviet pincer attacks begin trying to converge on Krasnodar. On the 10th, German rearguards blow the bridges there. They are not going to defend the city so much as run a delaying operation. Soviet troops enter the suburbs the 11th and take it today, push on towards Novorossiysk. But it's the Axis who are making offensive plans in North Africa. I talked last week about the fall of Faid Pass to the Axis. The significance of the event was not lost on Rommel, for he realized that the way was now open for an attack on the American supply center at Gafsa. He knew the 8th Army would not be able to attack Mareth for several more weeks, and he could therefore spare some of his mobile forces for a dramatic venture. British 8th Army can realistically only have a fairly small force in Tunisia until they can have regular supply traffic through Tripoli, and that could take until the end of the month to get the port fixed enough to do so. Local Luftwaffe boss Smiling Albert Kesselring likes the idea of bringing the fight to the Americans and expands on it by suggesting that Rommel and Hans-Jürgen von Arnim both attack and try to destroy the Americans. Now, we've seen that Rommel is on the outs with Axis command, and we also know Rommel has health issues. So he might not physically be up for this, but Kesselring knows that von Arnim is just waiting for Rommel to leave Africa so he can take over all Axis forces there. So Kesselring tells von Arnim to just have patience, according to Ken Ford saying, "Let's give Rommel this one chance of glory before he gets out of Africa." Well, Arnim's deputy, General Ziegler, sends his attack out towards the U.S. communications and supply hub at Sidi Bouzid as the week ends. There is also action, Allied action, beginning this week in Burma. On the 8th, the Chindits under Ord Wingate get moving. This force is the 77th Indian Brigade, and it is to disrupt the enemy behind his lines and show that the Indians and British can take on the Japanese in the jungle. They are in two groups, a southern group, which is to distract the Japanese attention from the northern one. And that brings me to the end of the week. An American victory at Guadalcanal as the Japanese evacuate, but Soviet victories basically everywhere from Kursk on south in the USSR. They are on a roll, a big roll. A roll such as one we have not seen the Allies make this war so far. Look at all that land in the Donbas, up beyond Kharkov and down in the Caucasus the Soviets have retaken in just the past couple of weeks. It took the Axis a long time and an awful lot of casualties to take that land in the first place, and now they've just lost it just like that. And what if the Soviets can reach Mariupol or the Dnieper? Then it really might be too late for Manstein to make any sort of counterattack, and it might be curtains for the Wehrmacht. The Soviet advances are taking back the territory the Axis took starting last summer with Fall Blau. If you want to see the deployment of both sides' forces last July, we did a nerdy and awesome special about that, which you can check out right here. And these are our newest commissioned officers in the Time Ghost Army. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is Matthias von Maren. The Army is our financial backbone, and you can join the Army to get more great content like this and like that. timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Every dollar does in fact count. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.